Ever since Sarah moved into the new student dormitory, strange things had been happening. The old building seemed to have a life of its own, its creaking floors and whispering corridors holding secrets that sent shivers down her spine. Late one night, as Sarah lay in bed, she heard the sound of footsteps echoing through the empty halls. At first, she brushed it off as her imagination, but as the footsteps drew nearer, she realized that she was not alone. Terrified, Sarah pulled the covers over her head and tried to ignore the creeping sense of dread that filled the room. But no matter how hard she tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next day, Sarah decided to investigate. Armed with nothing but a flashlight, she ventured into the darkest corners of the dormitory, determined to uncover the truth behind the strange occurrences. As she explored the abandoned rooms and forgotten hallways, Sarah felt as though she was being watched. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of her vision, and strange whispers echoed through the empty corridors. Just as she was about to give up hope, Sarah stumbled upon a hidden room at the end of a long hallway. Inside, she found a collection of old photographs and newspaper clippings, each one more disturbing than the last. As she examined the photographs, Sarah realized with horror that they were all of former students who had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. And in the corner of one photograph, she saw a shadowy figure lurking in the darkness, its eyes burning with malevolence. With a sinking feeling in her heart, Sarah knew that she had stumbled upon something truly evil. But before she could react, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. Turning around, she came face to face with the shadowy figure from the photograph. With a scream of terror, Sarah turned and ran, her heart pounding in her chest as she raced through the empty corridors, desperate to escape the horrors that lurked within the dormitory's walls. But no matter how fast she ran, she couldn't escape the darkness that pursued her. And as she burst through the doors of the dormitory and into the safety of the night, she knew that her nightmare was far from over. The police arrived soon after, drawn by the sound of Sarah's screams. But when they searched the dormitory, they found no trace of the shadowy figure or the horrors that Sarah had witnessed. As Sarah sat in the safety of the police station, she couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was still out there, waiting for its next victim. And as she looked out into the night, she knew that she would never truly be free from the shadows that haunted her dreams. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah's life in the student dormitory became a living nightmare. Every night, she was plagued by terrifying dreams of the shadowy figure that had pursued her through the halls, its eyes burning with malevolent intent, despite her best efforts to convince herself that it was just her imagination. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister lurked within the walls of the dormitory. Doors would slam shut on their own, strange shadows would flit across the walls, and the air was heavy with an oppressive sense of dread. Desperate for answers, Sarah began to research the history of the dormitory. What she discovered chilled her to the bone. Years ago, the dormitory had been the site of a series of unsolved disappearances. Students had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers of dark rituals and occult practices. As Sarah delved deeper into the dormitory's dark past, she realized that she was not alone in her fears. Other students had reported similar experiences, and many spoke of a shadowy figure that roamed the halls at night, its presence filling them with terror. Determined to confront the evil that lurked within the dormitory, Sarah gathered a group of her fellow students and embarked on a daring investigation. Armed with flashlights and courage, they ventured into the darkest corners of the building, determined to uncover the truth. But as they explored the abandoned rooms and forgotten hallways, they soon realized that they were not alone. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of their vision, and strange whispers echoed through the empty corridors. Just as they were about to give up hope, they stumbled upon a hidden chamber deep within the bowels of the dormitory. Inside, They found evidence of the dark rituals that had taken place there, including strange symbols etched into the walls and eerie artifacts scattered across the floor. As they examined the chamber, a sense of dread washed over them. They knew that they had stumbled upon something truly evil, something that had been lurking in the shadows of the dormitory for years. But before they could react, they heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. Turning around, they came face to face with the shadowy figure that had haunted their nightmares. With a scream of terror, they turned and ran, their hearts pounding in their chests as they raced through the empty corridors, desperate to escape the horrors that lurked within the dormitory's walls. But no matter how fast they ran, they couldn't escape the darkness that pursued them. And as they burst through the doors of the dormitory and into the safety of the night, they knew that their nightmare was far from over. The police arrived soon after, drawn by the sound of their screams. But when they searched the dormitory, they found no trace of the shadowy figure or the horrors that Sarah and her friends had witnessed. As Sarah sat in the safety of the police station, she couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was still out there, waiting for its next victim. And as she looked out into the night, she knew that she would never truly be free from the shadows that haunted her dreams. In the quaint coastal village of Willowbrook, nestled between rugged cliffs and the restless sea, lived Emily, a young bride who had recently moved to the village with her new husband James. They had chosen Willowbrook for its tranquil beauty and the promise of a fresh start. But little did they know that the village held dark secrets beneath its picturesque facade. As they settled into their new home, strange things began to happen. At night, Emily would hear strange whispers echoing through the corridors, and the shadows seemed to dance in the flickering candlelight. At first, she brushed it off as her imagination, but as the days went by, the whispers grew louder and the shadows more sinister. James, too, noticed the strange occurrences, but he dismissed them as the quirks of an old house. He urged Emily not to worry, assuring her that everything would be fine. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. One stormy night, as the winds howled and the waves crashed against the cliffs, Emily woke to find herself alone in the house. James was nowhere to be found, and the house seemed to creak and groan with a life of its own. Terrified, Emily ventured out into the storm, calling out for her husband, but he was nowhere to be found. As she searched the village, she noticed that the other houses were dark and empty, their inhabitants nowhere to be seen. Desperate for answers, Emily sought out the village elders, hoping they could shed light on the strange occurrences. But when she mentioned James's disappearance, they grew silent, their faces pale with fear. Finally, one of the elders spoke, his voice barely more than a whisper. He told Emily of the village's dark past, of the ancient curse that had plagued Willowbrook for generations. He spoke of the restless spirits that roamed the cliffs, seeking vengeance for past wrongs. As Emily listened in horror, she realized that James had become ensnared in the village's dark history. Determined to save him, she ventured out into the storm once more, guided by the faint glimmer of hope in her heart. But as she reached the cliffs overlooking the sea, she came face to face with the true horror of Willowbrook. There, standing on the edge of the cliff, was James, his eyes vacant and empty, his body swaying in the wind like a puppet on a string. With a cry of despair, Emily rushed forward, reaching out to her husband. But before she could reach him, a powerful gust of wind swept him over the edge, and he disappeared into the churning waters below. Heartbroken and alone, Emily stood on the cliffside, the echoes of the sea mingling with her cries of grief. And as the storm raged on around her, she knew that Willowbrook held more secrets than she could ever imagine, and that the darkness that lurked within its walls would haunt her for the rest of her days. In the quiet suburban neighborhood of Greenfield Grove, Sarah had just moved into her new home, excited for a fresh start in a new town. Little did she know that her life was about to take a terrifying turn, all because of her enigmatic neighbor, Mr. Thompson. From the moment Sarah first laid eyes on Mr. Thompson, she knew there was something off about him. His pale, gaunt face and piercing gaze sent a chill down her spine, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching her every move. At first, Sarah tried to avoid Mr. Thompson, but he seemed to be everywhere she turned. He would appear out of nowhere, lurking in the shadows of the neighborhood, his presence filling her with unease. As the days went by, strange things began to happen. Sarah would hear strange noises coming from Mr. Thompson's house late at night, eerie whispers, and the sound of shuffling footsteps. And whenever she walked past his house, she could swear she saw strange lights flickering in the windows. Determined to uncover the truth about her mysterious neighbor, Sarah began to investigate. She enlisted the help of her friend, Alex, and together they delved into Mr. Thompson's past, uncovering a trail of dark secrets and unsolved mysteries. But the more they uncovered, the more they realized that Mr. Thompson was not just a harmless eccentric, he was something far more sinister. He was a master of dark magic, using his powers to manipulate the world around him and bend it to his will. As Sarah and Alex delved deeper into Mr. Thompson's world, they became entangled in a web of dark forces beyond their comprehension. Strange accidents began to occur, accidents that seemed to be targeting Sarah and anyone who dared to get too close to Mr. Thompson. Determined to put an end to the madness once and for all, Sarah and Alex confronted Mr. Thompson in his own home. But as they stood face to face with the enigmatic neighbor, they realized that they were no match for his dark powers. With a wave of his hand, Mr. Thompson unleashed a wave of darkness that engulfed them, dragging them into a nightmarish realm of shadows and despair. And as they struggled to escape, they realized that they were trapped in Mr. Thompson's twisted game, with no hope of escape. In the end, Sarah and Alex were never seen again, their fates forever entwined with the enigmatic neighbor who had brought nothing but darkness and despair to Greenfield Grove. And as the years passed, the legend of Mr. Thompson lived on, a cautionary tale of the dangers that lurk behind closed doors in the quietest of neighborhoods. Weeks turned into months, and the once peaceful neighborhood of Greenfield Grove descended into chaos and fear. The disappearance of Sarah and Alex had sent shockwaves through the community, leaving everyone on edge and searching for answers. But as time passed, the memory of Sarah and Alex began to fade, replaced by whispers and rumors about Mr. Thompson and the dark powers that he wielded. Some claimed to have seen strange lights and heard eerie noises coming from his house late at night, while others spoke of mysterious accidents that seemed to plague anyone who dared to cross his path. Despite the growing sense of unease, life in Greenfield Grove continued on, albeit with an undercurrent of fear and suspicion. But for Emily, the new neighbor who had recently moved into Sarah's old house, the sense of dread only grew stronger with each passing day. From the moment Emily first arrived in Greenfield Grove, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The air seemed to crackle with tension, and the once vibrant neighborhood now felt like a ghost town, haunted by the specter of Sarah and Alex's disappearance. But it was Mr. Thompson who truly unnerved Emily. His presence seemed to loom over the neighborhood like a dark cloud, casting a shadow of fear over everything and everyone. And as Emily watched him from her window, she couldn't help but feel that he was watching her too, his eyes burning with a hunger that sent shivers down her spine. Determined to uncover the truth about Mr. Thompson and the dark forces that lurked within Greenfield Grove, Emily began to investigate. She spent hours poring over old newspapers and scouring the internet for any information she could find, determined to unravel the mystery that had claimed Sarah and Alex's lives. But the more she dug, the more she realized that she was playing a dangerous game. Strange things began to happen. Doors would slam shut on their own. Objects would move of their own accord, and Emily would wake in the middle of the night to find strange symbols etched into her skin. Terrified and alone, Emily knew that she was running out of time. With each passing day, the darkness seemed to close in around her, threatening to swallow her whole. But she refused to back down, determined to confront Mr. Thompson and put an end to the nightmare once and for all. One fateful night, as a storm raged outside, Emily ventured into Mr. Thompson's house, her heart pounding in her chest as she confronted the enigmatic neighbor. With a trembling hand, she reached out to touch him, but as her fingers brushed against his skin, she recoiled in horror. For in that moment, Emily realized the terrible truth. Mr. Thompson was not just a man, but something far more sinister. He was a vessel for dark forces beyond her comprehension, a being of pure malevolence that had been lurking in the shadows of Greenfield Grove for centuries. With a scream of terror, Emily turned and fled, her footsteps echoing through the empty corridors of Mr. Thompson's house as she raced for the safety of her own home. But even as she ran, she knew that she could never truly escape the darkness that had taken root in Greenfield Grove. And as she huddled in her bed, the sound of the storm raging outside, Emily knew that the nightmare was far from over. For in the heart of Greenfield Grove, something ancient and evil lurked, waiting for its next victim to claim.